Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest today is Shermichael Singleton. He's an entrepreneur, a political commentator, and a contributor for CNN. Welcome, Shermichael. You came into the lion's den.
Sabby, it's good to see you. It's good to see you again. I mean, you and I first met, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, maybe, when I was guest hosting a show for The Hill called Rising, and I was just very impressed with you. And granted, we approach things from different ideological perspectives, but I really had an appreciation for how nuanced you were. I thought you were objective, even while maintaining your beliefs, and that's hard as hell to find these days. So I was like, I rock with Sabby. I like her.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, you have been getting a lot of attention lately, and I want to show everybody something that you tweeted here. You said that Democrats have a problem that they don't know how to solve. You don't lose the working class, Latinos, and a subset of Black men, and even some young voters all in one cycle unless your brand is poison. And make no mistake about it, it is. So I want to get into your thoughts behind this. And for those who may be new, who will see this, I'm not a Democrat or Republican. Yep. I'm a registered independent. I did come from that Bernie Sanders wave of progressivism. But I'm curious because I think I've been very critical of the Democratic Party. The fact that they lost to me in 2024 was not a surprise. I actually predicted that they were going to lose.
You definitely did.
I did. But if you can dive a little bit deeper into this, what is the problem you think with the Democratic Party brand?
Yeah, I mean, look, Sabby, I'll start with younger voters, then I'll go to Latinos, and then I'll go to the subset of Black men. So younger voters, I'm a millennial. I thank God I happen to be fortunate and blessed to live a very nice life. But for many of my friends who are college educated or not college educated, we went through COVID. We've gone through a lot of economic changes that have not yielded the type of financial comfort we were promised if you work hard, if you go get a college degree, or if you just go get a trade or just get a decent job in general, then you'll be able to live a comfortable life. That hasn't panned through, and the Democratic Party has sort of become synonymous with being the party of working class people of color, if you will, which is a term that I'm not a big fan of. And so if you fit in one of those categories and you're a younger person and you're saying, well, wait a minute here, I've voted for this party because I was told that this is the party that is more open-minded, that this is the party that is advocating for the type of future that will yield to either being on an equal playing field as generations before, my parents, my grandparents, or I can even supersede the expectations that they had for themselves when they were younger. That did not necessarily pan through. Then you go to college. If you want to go to college at all, it's expensive. You can't afford it. The idea of going to a trade school, now you have to question, well, is this a legitimate trade school where whatever certification I get will be recognized when I mean, that's a whole nother dynamic, right? And these policies were advocated for a long time by many Democrats going all the way back to the 90s. It didn't pan through. So I think that's why a lot of younger people have said, you know what, I'm disgruntled, I'm angry. Economically, this isn't working for me. I can't afford anything. I can't buy a house, etc. Then you go to Latinos. I'm not Latino, but from some of the focus group data I have seen, qualitative stuff, and even some of the quantitative stuff, numerical data I've seen, a lot of Latinos said, look, I've come through the country with some type of a process. I certainly want my cousins and other family members to come as well. But at the end of the day, I'm starting to recognize that you got to have a structure, because when you don't have a structure, then competition becomes unsustainable when there's too many people competing for the same types of jobs. You look at Department of Labor statistics, Black people and Latinos are the two dominant groups who compete for what they call lower skilled jobs. I probably would rephrase how they have written that in their data, but that's the way they write it, not Shermichael Singleton's opinion of it. But when you look at that data, if you're in one of those two groups and you're thinking, well, okay, great, I came in for a better life. Now I'm having to compete because I thought the promise of America was that I too would be able to gain some level of economic and financial independence to give my children a better future than the one that I had. Again, all of this, in my opinion, is surrounded a lot around economics. Then you go to Black men. You talk about, again, economic viability. Let's go all the way back to the early 90s where NAFTA, this idea of free trade was, yeah, maybe some manufacturing will move out of the country. But the promise is jobs will find themselves in new ways. Maybe you'll move to the C-suite, or maybe there'll be more advanced jobs where you'll have to maybe increase your skills, but those jobs will be better. And for the consumer, you're going to pay less, right? Because we're building things in other countries, and when those things come back, it's going to be cheaper. Everybody wins. That was the promise. Well, fast forward to the late 90s, early 2000s, we had a plethora of data that came out that suggested that wasn't the case. Yeah, you got your cheaper goods, but you got your cheaper goods at the loss of hundreds of thousands, potentially even millions of jobs. So when we talk about the Rust Belt, that's why a lot of those towns and cities are now dormant. And then when you talk specifically about Black people, there were a lot of African Americans who saw themselves move up to the middle class as a part of reliable and sound manufacturing jobs. Black men who used their hands, could provide for their families, could buy a home, could put their kids, again, through college, and it was actually freaking affordable at the time. All of those things diminished. All of those things went away. And so again, you just fast forward on this perpetual torment of working class people is how I would describe it, looking at the Democratic Party, and people saying, well, you know what? Yeah, Republican Party has been the Republican Party of yesteryear, synonymous with wealthy people, rich people. But maybe if we give them an opportunity, maybe the equilibrium will shift a little bit, right? Maybe the pendulum will swing a little bit. And you've seen this over quite some time now, working class people moving more and more to the Republican Party, starting with whites. And then you saw last year, Hispanics, a subset of Black men, a certain percent of young people. And so my critique to Democrats was, as Harvard professor Michael Sandel would frame it, as this meritocratic hubris has allowed them or led them to be detached from their own voters. And so now you've lost some important groups and subsets of your voters that I'm not convinced they'll be able to win back in the immediate, but also the onus for Republicans. And I have to be honest, as a Republican and a conservative, we must deliver for those people, Sabby. They're not hardline conservatives. They're not hardline Republicans. They gave us an opportunity because they believed that we could make the playing field equal again. And in some ways, and I'll just quickly say, when Trump talks about tariffs, I don't think that he's necessarily wrong to say we need to have an equilibrium. We need to have fair tariffs, fair trade. He's right. Now, we could disagree on the mechanisms by which he's going about it, and that's up for debate, but he's been the first president in a long time to say, wait a minute here, this just isn't working. Bernie Sanders, your guy, was another person in this sort of populist message, similar to Trump in many ways, of saying the economy isn't working for the vast majority of people. I like to make a lot of money. This isn't to say anything against people who do well, but how do we help everybody else do well also? And I think that's why Democrats haven't done well.
So this is interesting because a lot of what you said, I would say that those of us, that people who are leftists or socialists, agree with what you said there about the economic issues. But I want to dive into this part about jobs, the federal jobs. This is an area of employment that has gratefully helped Black families build some type of wealth. It happened in my family. Like a lot of my friends, their parents were able to become homeowners and build some type of generational wealth because they were federal employees and they had really great benefits. Just a reality. When you look at and see that JD Vance and Donald Trump and Elon Musk, this whole Doge phenomenon here, where they are laying off federal workers, I would say that that doesn't help the Black middle class. Like a lot of those people are Black. And I would say that the answer is not to lay off workers, but the answer is to just, if I had a choice, to cut that defense budget, which is over $150 billion, and give that money to the American people. And I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
I definitely understand the framing of the argument of lessening defense spending. I get it. I don't necessarily agree with it. I guess no surprise there. I don't agree with it in part because I'm looking at the military spending and increase in military technology coming from our greatest adversary, that being China. And I would, at a minimum, want to be on an equal playing field with them to stop their aggression if we ever needed to. I wouldn't say that it would be wise at this point in time to decrease spending as a result when they've increased their military technology with hypersonic missiles. We're still behind, I think, about 5 or 7 years. That's not a good thing. They just released some new fighter jets I don't think we have publicly disclosed what we think the technology is embedded in those new fighter jets. They're beefing up their naval capabilities and the technology there. They're obviously spending a ton of money on artificial intelligence and AI, and utilizing that in terms of another component of military capabilities that could thwart our capabilities. So I just don't know if now would be a good time to decrease military spending. With that said, though, you're absolutely right about a lot of African Americans becoming exceptionally well off, middle class, upper middle class, and some even rich because of government contracting jobs in particular. Would I fire people indiscriminately? No, I would go about it differently. Do I think government needs to be reformed? I really do believe so, Sabby. Do I think that there is government bloat that isn't necessary for the government to run efficiently, effectively, and deliver on the promises to the American people, particularly those at the bottom end of the spectrum? I would say, yes, we should be able to do that. And a part of doing that, you are going to recede the size of various agencies. That's just going to be a result of efficiencies. You are going to, unfortunately, let some people go, as we saw in the early 90s, although it took about 5 years. They let it go around 377,000 people. That was Bill Clinton working in tandem with Democrats and Republicans at the time. It was a much more methodical process. I have advocated for following something similar to making government work more efficiently. And what we saw was actually a net gain to the economy as a result of the way they did things 15, 20 years ago. I would probably say, let's go back to the past and look at what they did. How can we follow some of that and repeat it now? Again, you're going to let some people go. I just got to be honest about that. I'm not going to sugarcoat it or lie, but there's a way you can do this where it's not indiscriminate. There's a way you could have Congress pass some type of a financial buyout. So if you're saying like, hey, we got to shrink the size of your particular department, we know this is going to be tough, but let us give you a 1 to 2 year buyout so you have time to find something else. If you're at the point where you could retire, let us figure out some creative ways to make sure that you have a bountiful retirement so that you can live out the rest of your life with dignity. There are ways that I, as a conservative, would say we could do this while still accomplishing the objective of saving taxpayers' money, shrinking the size of government to make it run more efficient and effective. And I'm not necessarily certain that we're doing that currently in the way that I personally would want to do it if I were president.
That's interesting. So 2 things I want to touch on. The China thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think China is an enemy. I see China as a competitor, as an economic competitor. I really do. Part of the reason why China is a competitor with us economically is because we sent jobs there. We sent jobs there.
Thank you, Richard Nixon.
It's like we had a lot of the jobs that we had here. We sent to China. We don't really make much here in the United States anymore. To your point about manufacturing, we just don't really do that. I think if you talk to people in China, and I have done that, you'll find that they're really not stressed about the United States. Like, they don't see us in that way. They are trying to make the best living for the people in their country as possible. They don't have the poverty rates that we have in the United States. They're taking care of their people. But I never really bought into China wants to come after the United States. I don't see it that way. If anything, from what I've seen when it comes to foreign policy, is that the US government has been the aggressor. We have destroyed countries all over the world. We've stolen resources from countries like Haiti. All over the world, we've demolished these countries. We tend to be the aggressor. We're the country that have military bases all over the world, not China. So I don't see them as our enemy. If anything, I think that we should be trying to work with China so that we can work together economically. They're gonna seriously pass us because they do have advanced technology. They're ahead of the game.
And they always play the long game. They always play the long game. I mean, they've been around a long time. They have seen many, many empires, Ottomans, Byzantines. They've seen the Britons. They've seen many come and go. The Spaniards, they have been around in various iterations, and they have seen, great empires come and great empires go. And I think the question for us in the United States, and this is something that, Sabby, I have focused on a lot, to your point about a lot of the manufacturing being in China, China's ability to just pretty much effectively steal all intellectual property, and there's no recourse for American companies to do anything about it. That is another big big question and problem for me that I think the U.S. needs to tackle. My question, though, for us is, as we have seen in various ways our growth decline, as we have seen the EU, European Union, start to openly ask the question, well, should the dollar be the global currency, the reserve? As we see China lead with BRICS, was that Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now there are other smaller developing countries becoming part of BRICS, in part because they have said, well, the United States hasn't been the greatest partner. And we saw that even when Joe Biden had the Africa Summit a couple of years ago in the White House. I had a couple of African countries that I was advising, and a lot of the leaders were saying, we would love to partner with the United States. It just seems to make sense to us. But the United States doesn't treat us with the type of dignity or respect you treat your Canadian friends or your French friends, your German friends. So if the Chinese are coming and saying, hey, we're willing to give you money to beef up your economy, to invest in infrastructure, to increase education, why would we not at a minimum entertain said potential offerings? Because you guys aren't being competitive, saying, well, wait a minute, consider us instead. So there are some really, really challenging times ahead for the United States, I would argue, in terms of us maintaining our number one, I guess, status, if you will, as the world's global superpower. And I don't think we're doing enough to adhere to making sure that we provide for ourselves, that we're good partners for our friends, big countries and developing countries. You mentioned Haiti, for example. Let's look at Congo, Sabby. China is in Congo right now. Congo has incredible rare earth minerals. I'm not saying that we should just take, but why not go to the Congolese and say, well, how can we partner with you? How can we have American companies spend money to help develop in the Congo? And we're not going to send our people. Allow the Congolese to do those jobs, right? Let's build infrastructure there so that it's beneficial. Why aren't we doing that? And so these are things that I just think the U.S. is on the wrong footing. And I'm really worried that if we don't figure these things out, it's not going to bode well for us in the next 10, 15 years.
These are really good points. The reason why we're not trying to partner in the Congo is because we exploit the labor. And it's not just the U.S. Cobalt is a big deal in the Congo. All of us have these smartphones. They could not work without the cobalt. And unfortunately, that labor has been exploited. We've been talking before also about, genocide in Gaza. There's a genocide in the Congo. So there's a lot that's happening there. And it's unfortunate. And I do speak out against that. But I don't want the United States to be a superpower. I want us to have a multipolar world. I want us to work with other countries and other nations. I don't want us to dominate other countries and other nations. I also think that it increases tensions and it raises hostility. I have lived overseas. So I lived part of my life overseas, part in the US. And one of the things that I can tell you I noticed is that at the time I did not understand why so many people I would meet had these issues with the United States. But as I got older and I started to do my research, I started to see things for what they really were. I think that if the United States government was a better a friend, I don't want to say partner, but like a more friend to these countries, people wouldn't have those hostilities towards us. But we're not. We have to stop exploiting the global South. We have to stop taking, from these countries. And this brings me to the immigration point, because I think this was a big one in 2024 for the presidential election. Everyone, a lot of people were complaining about the migrant crisis at the border. But I didn't feel like people were getting to the root cause, which is that why are so many people coming from places like Venezuela? What happened in Venezuela?
I said I didn't want to cut you off, but I'll just quickly say, and I'm sure your audience is probably aware of this. I mean, we certainly haven't made things great in that part of the world. And I'm assuming you were getting ready to go there, Sabby. Yep. And I have advocated for this, and I think I may have even written about this. I think the onus is probably on us to engage in the governments in those countries so that people will want to stay. Because I think if we were to engage, if we were to try to, again, I'm a big proponent of partnerships. I just think when you're the world's global superpower, you have such a unique ability to partner with so many different countries who have so many unique resources that benefits us, but that would also benefit the people in those countries. I'm not one to be an interventionist. I'm not one to say, well, let's just take while we allow the people there to starve and die. I just like personally, I don't think that's necessary. I think you can. I'm pro-capitalist, as you know, Sabby, and I know some of your thoughts on that. But I think you can be of a position of saying, let's increase and have a revitalization of struggling, poor, and working class people, not only in our own country domestically, but abroad. And we have enough money to do those things. Why not do that? So people who are fleeing Venezuela and other places say, well, you know what, United States, they kind of screwed up by taking different leaders out for leaders that they wanted 25, 30 years ago that they thought was going to be to their benefit, and look at the net result. Now they're coming to clean it up. And by clean it up, I mean, we're going to help invest in infrastructure. We're going to help invest in clean up with drugs and gangs. We're going to make sure that the people aren't wanting to go in that direction because they have opportunities. Again, we have enough money and resources to do those things where it's mutually beneficial for our country and those countries. Then people will say, well, why in the hell would I want to go to the United States when my country's safe? There's jobs, and the U.S. is investing, and they're not bringing their own people to do this work. They're giving us, we can do the work because there's resources within our own country. We can do that. Why aren't we doing those things? Sabby, I got to tell you, to me, this isn't a Republican or a Democratic thing. This is a willpower thing. And we just don't have the will to want to do this when it makes perfect sense to do so.
These are interesting points. And it points to, again, I think that one of the criticisms that I heard from more so in particular Black voters this time around was the migrant crisis. Yeah. There were a number of people I spoke to on the ground, also came onto the show, that they weren't happy about the fact that there were migrants brought into their communities, poor, low-income communities where they already don't have the resources. Yeah. So there has been tensions in Chicago. There's been tensions here in Boston, Massachusetts.
New York, where I'm at right now.
New York, a lot of that. And now what I see is that we have workers pitted against each other. So we have the working class fighting against the working class. And then I look at people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Peter Thiel, so to speak, these billionaires who have so much money, enormous vast of wealth. And I feel like people aren't pointing their fingers at the people that are at the top, the 0.01%. They're not losing any wealth. They're not losing their jobs. And the working class is fighting against each other. And I'm curious, what do you think about that? Because my biggest fear is that there's going to come a point in this time. Number one, I don't think the middle class really exists in this country. I think
it's almost non-existent for the most part. I mean, it really is. It's either you got means or you're poor.
Exactly. And so I think that the question is like, what is the right path there? Because I know that you're a capitalist, so I know you're not going to say we should all have socialism. I totally get that. But I feel like there's no checks on the enormous vast of wealth that like these billionaires have accumulated. And I want to get your take on that.
So I'm not against billionaires. I don't have a problem with people becoming billionaires. I just got to be honest about that. But like you, I look at the data. And I look at the fact that people are struggling more so than they ever have in the history of our country. Whether it's manufacturing leaving, whether it's us bringing in HB, whatever the hell, what is HB1, the visa, bringing in foreign workers, which, believe it or not, I think Steve Bannon had some great points. I know he can be a controversial figure for a lot of people, but his critique of bringing in workers to do jobs that we should be training our own people for, I think he was spot on. I look at the global economy, I look at where we're headed, and the idea of work is changing in a lot of ways. If we're going to bring manufacturing back, that will certainly help to an extent, but we are becoming more technologically advanced. And so I think the big question for me right now is why aren't we, and we should, but why aren't we doing enough to prepare our people for the type of work to come? AI is going to decimate a lot of jobs, Sabby. McKinsey had a report that came out a couple of years ago that was saying by 2030, I think it was like 30 or 40% of the jobs would either go away or drastically change. Are we even prepared for that, Sabby? We're not talking about that in the United States at all. And so your question to me, how do we have a more balanced economy where people aren't struggling the way they are while a small pocket of people are becoming more wealthy? I acknowledge that that is a reality. I acknowledge that it exists. And a part of my critique of wanting to reform that would be changing the preparation that people need to compete. I think you got to figure out a way to address the cost issue. It's too expensive to live in the United States right now. To afford affordable housing is too expensive right now. You got to address that. We have a housing shortage. There's enough technology right now. Hell, even 3D printing. I was reading a report out of Texas a week ago. There's this company, I think in Houston or San Antonio, and they're like printing 3D houses, and it costs like $80,000 to do this. They're experimenting with developing, I think 130 or 140 houses just to showcase like, hey, there are better ways to build houses quicker. That's more cost effective. Like, why aren't we exploring these things? Is that going to be a final solution to the question you asked? No. But if I'm a wealthy person and I'm running a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, I would personally be of the mindset, if I'm paying my workers more and people are happy, then the work output is going to be greater. There's actually research on this. When people make more money, they work harder, they're going to do better work. And so to me, if your bottom line as a capitalist is about the bottom dollar, the bottom line of increasing your revenue, then you're going to increase your revenue if people are working harder by virtue of being paid more money. To me, that, like, I own a company. We got maybe about 60 people in our network that we're launching, my business partner and I, and we pay all of our guys, our production guys, our editors, a little bit more than what the current market share is. And Sabby, our guys work hard as hell. And I always ask, because I sometimes talk about this on TV, why do you guys work so hard? And they'll say, well, sure, shit, dude, you're paying us well. Why in the hell wouldn't we work hard? We want to keep this money coming in. So I can say from my own empirical experience that when you do pay people well, and that hasn't changed my bottom line, Sabby, as a co-founder of this business, we're actually making even more money because our guys are doing great work. So I would encourage people who are at the very, very top, it's not going to hurt the trajectory of your business to share a little bit with the people who are helping the businesses make as much money as they're making. And I don't think that's an anti-capitalist position. I think that's a broader, more expansive, healthier outlook on what capitalism can be.
That's interesting. I would say we need worker ownership of the means of production. We need workers to own the means of production. I would go in that direction. But I think we both can agree.
Can I ask before, if I can ask you this question? I know Amazon does allow for some type of equity with shares with some of their employees. I don't know what that looked like. Would you want something like that, where a company as big as Amazon would say, hey, we're going to give all of our employees 5% equity in terms of stock into the company? Is that something you would be open to exploring, or would you say that's just not enough?
I think they would have to move towards a worker co-op. So that way, everyone that's an employee of the company, they own a piece of the business. Okay. They own like a share of the business. I mean, I think they're too big for that to happen now. But
so what about, so let me ask you, and I'm just hypothesizing here. If a company were to say, we're going to set aside, I'm just trying to think how you could do this. Let's say you'd say we're going to set aside 15% of our units. It probably wouldn't be class A, maybe class B or whatever. But let's say you do 15% of our units for our workers. And every worker, I don't know if you have 800,000 workers, 1 million workers, you figure out what that percent would be. And as the company increases in value, obviously those shares, those units would increase in value for the workers. Would you be open-minded to something like that? Because I would be open if I ever was in a position to run a big company. I actually would be open to exploring something like that.
That would be better. But my ask is, what happens if you lose your job? Like, what happens if you get laid off? Do you still have those shares?
Yeah, why wouldn't you? I wouldn't structure it in such a way where if you're laid off, or maybe I wouldn't structure the language, because you would have to structure this legally. I wouldn't structure it in a way where I would say, well, if you lose your job, then the shares come back to the company. I would say, okay, you are laid off for whatever reason, then you are able to keep those shares because maybe the person wants to liquidate those shares, and then you got X, Y, and Z%, and the company is now worth $2 trillion. Then those shares could be thousands and thousands of dollars for a person. So it wouldn't hurt the bottom line of the company, the way I would see it, to allow a person to leave with those units. It wouldn't, because even if they were to sell some of those units would still come back to the company. Yeah, so I can't envision how that would be a bad thing for the company. And someone may challenge me on that, but as I'm thinking about it out loud, I just can't see how that would be a negative.
Yeah, I push people to have some type of ownership. And I realize every business can't be a worker co-op as it is designed today. But I do push for people to have
that. Sabby. I got to be honest with you. I'm not. I know we're arriving to this conclusion from two different perspectives, but again, I don't think that would minimize or lessen the idea of capitalism writ large. I mean, if the idea, this exchange of currency, of products, of goods, this sort of semi-unregulated market, because we do regulate our markets to an extent, companies are going to make money. Should the people who are working to create or to advance this product or this good be a part of that money-making process? I don't see why not. And again, I go back to, if people feel comfortable, if they're happy, if they know that financially they're secure, that output is going to be greater for the company writ large. And so if that company is going to have greater output, you're going to increase your value. Why not share a little bit with the people who are producing said products? I don't think that anyhow lessens the viability of a company. And I think you can still be capitalist and say, well, hell, if my workers are going to benefit and have a piece of the pie, then my piece of the pie is going to even be great, because if my pie rises, their pie rises, everybody sort of wins here, in my personal opinion. We don't see it that way. There are some companies that I think that have tried this to great effect. But on a larger scale, Sabby, I personally would advocate for something like that. I wouldn't be against that.
That's interesting. It brings me to what happened last year, because the feedback that I received all last year prior to the election, in particular from Black men, had somewhat to do with what you were just talking about. Business, ownership, the economy, and then also feeling as though the Democratic Party has totally ignored Black male voters. We kind of saw this a little bit with Kamala Harris's campaign, where she tried to sneak in towards the end the part about here's the plan for Black men after people were criticizing. But I think that I gotta say, and for me, like even as a Black woman, it seems like to me all the focus tends to be on Black women are going to come help this party. Black women are going to show up just like they did before, and they're going to keep us alive. I saw some of it. As let's just not really listen to what Black guys have to say and how they feel. And I kind of thought about that, and I was like, well, wow, I understand it. They couldn't understand why some Black men were willing to vote for Trump, or I would say most decided to stay at home.
Yeah. I mean, Sabby, I think it's misunderstanding Black men's priorities. I got to be honest with you. A lot of the things that I have seen Democrats talk about and focus on, and a lot of my Black friends, I went to an HBCU. A lot of my friends aren't Republicans. Some of them did actually vote for Trump last year. Those who really are like business guys, entrepreneurs, they just thought it just made more sense for them. But there were a lot of guys that I have friends that I'm close with who are Democrats who just didn't vote. They may have wrote in like Dr. West or somebody else. They just stayed home altogether. And a lot of the critique that I hear from my own cohort of friends, and I think a lot of the data would support this, there isn't a priority on trying to figure out how Black men do better in terms of their finances and economics. But you all Black women are superseding us in terms of academic attainment. You're starting to make more money than Black men, because you're frankly becoming more qualified. And for a lot of men, the idea of college, while that's great for some, Naturally speaking, we do things with our hands, but that economy doesn't really exist anymore. And so there's really been no one speaking to, well, what is going to lead to a revitalization of success in economics for Black men, where they can climb the ladder and feel a sense of pride for themselves and the ability to provide for their families and to be active participants in their community. And then when you bring in a lot of the social stuff, then that's a whole nother thing where a lot of Black men are just like, well, these things aren't for me. They aren't speaking to my problems. But they're telling me I should be supportive of things that I may naturally be skeptical of. I'll just put it that way. So how do any of these things move the needle for me in terms of providing, which for most of us as men, I just feel like we just feel like that's our job. We just naturally feel if I have a woman, wife, girlfriend, whatever, I just have to provide and take care of what's mine. If I don't really see a roadmap to helping me get there, then why would I continue to give that particular party my support when they're speaking to everybody else and giving solutions to everybody else but me, because they just assume I should just naturally vote for them because they're telling me the other side is bad because whether it's race or whatever the other issues may be. That's just not a strong enough argument anymore.
I totally hear where you're coming from. I feel like there tends to be a focus on vote for this person because she's a Black woman, or vote for this person because they're a woman of color, and not enough focus on policy, agenda. And my big push is a plan for the Black community. I just don't hear it. And I did feel like Cornel West had a really good policy around that. And of course, Jill Stein had a Black agenda that addressed Cancer Alley, which it was interesting to me. I brought this up to people. Don't you guys find it a little bit strange after Flint, the dirty water in Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi, these Democrat politicians don't even have anything on their platform about how Black people are getting sick from water, or in Louisiana, Cancer Alley, from the pollution. There's just nothing in it. And it's just, they know they need the Black vote in order to win, but they're not willing to come up with an agenda that is going to help or benefit the Black community. Another question I have for you, when it comes to conservatism, I think this is something the Democratic Party may get a little bit wrong about the Black community. From my perspective, when I was growing up, I mean, I'm further to the left, but my parents voted for Bernie Sanders in 2020. I was shocked that they did. They're not like believers in politics being, a save all or a savior at all. But they did come out and vote for Bernie. The big reason was Medicare for all, like the healthcare issue that they said, yeah, this needs to be addressed. But when I was growing up, I grew up in the church. Black church. And during that time, it was more common, like 2-parent household, for a lot of us, despite what people may tell you. And I think that it seems like Democrat leadership has lost sight of the fact that you need this group in order to win, but maybe you may be trying to push certain points in their face that ideologically, if they're especially still a part of the church, they don't agree with. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. And again, I was alluding to that point when I was talking about Black men being skeptical, because I try to be mindful of how I say certain things. I'm oftentimes reminded I don't want to offend anybody. And these days, every damn body is so easily offended by everything. But again, it is a lack of recognition that there is disintegration with modern democratic orthodoxy and the ethos, philosophically speaking, as it pertains to a lot of Black people in this country, and a lot of us being more conservative in our cultural outlook. Even in on the policing thing, I remember that debate last year came up, and I remember there was a poll that came out that showed most Black people actually agree, like, yeah, we do want police. That's not our critique. We just want good policing. We don't want policing that's unfair in our treatment. and I think that's a fair thing to expect. But we do want safe communities like everybody else, right? Or even in terms of how we spend money. I don't know about you, Sabby, but I know growing up with my grandparents or my parents, they were certainly fiscally conservative in how they spent money. I mean, I just remember my granddad all the time telling the boys, like, you know, we got allowances. Don't go and spend everything. You know, I remember my granddad being very strategic in what he put his money in, whether it was buying things for the house or I remember at the time, it was my granddad. This is when my dad was still alive. It's one of my uncles, and he was trying to get them to pull their money together to start buying properties because my grandfather owns a lot of properties. And so I just remember him being very forward thinking in how he wanted to manage finances. And I saw that passed on to my parents. And now I see it with my other siblings and my cousins. And just because the thought process always was, we historically haven't had a lot. So we have to preserve what we have and be smart with how we use what we have. And so there does seem to be this disconnect with the recognition of these long held beliefs in my mind with most Black people and modern Democratic Party. I wrote an article, Sabby, a couple years ago for Ebony Magazine. And the premise of my argument was, if you want to see what conservatism would look like actualized, like in the real world, I pretty much said, look at Black people in terms of our belief systems, in terms of our values, because I think we certainly understand that while change is needed, it's really easy to destroy and it takes a long time to build. It's why we do preserve a lot of the cultural values that have been passed on from generation for generation. Those things are usually really close and important to us as Black people. We are very reluctant and hesitant to discard those sorts of things because we recognize that they're critical to our preservation. I mean, these are very conservative ideals, intellectually speaking, that we have. And sometimes I think Republicans don't always get it. I'm saying this as a Republican. I think we're trying to figure it out. And my hope is that while we have gotten some Black men and even some Latinos, I hope we do what's right to preserve this support that we got last November. But I think Democrats in the modern sense, they don't get it at all, because I think there's just a complete detachment from where most Black people are to where I think a lot of current Democrats would like to go. And so maybe you bring along a lot of Black women, but I think they're going to lose a lot of Black men. I think this is the beginning of what's ahead for Democrats as it pertains to men in general, but particularly men of color.
And Gen Z, there was an article I read recently that said that Gen Z is shifting further right, which is very surprising to me. It's definitely not like how it usually it's the other way around. Like usually they're shifting towards the left. And I'm like, I had to think to myself, like, what has happened? Like, what has happened within the Democratic Party that caused that type of shift among young people? And what I'm hearing, in particular from younger men, is that they want to be able to feel like they do have some type of autonomy, and they don't want to be. Nina Turner tweeted this last year, that the Democratic Party emasculates Black men.
I remember that tweet went viral, and a lot of Republicans actually were saying this is why Democrats have a male problem. The former senator was right. I think she was 100% correct. I mean, Sabby, I'm a guy. I like to ride motorcycles, although I don't ride them anymore since we just had a baby and my wife made me get rid of them. But I like to do risky, dangerous stuff. I'm a big gun guy, as you're aware. I love my guns. I own 2 businesses in the gun space that do exceptionally well. I am like a guy. I'm just like a regular guy. I like to use expletives when I'm hanging out with the guys, and we like to talk shit to each other, and we, admire beautiful women, and we talk about how beautiful they are. That's okay. But I feel like, and I'm going to say my feelings now, and I don't like to rely on that often, but I just feel that Democrats constantly try to break down what is naturally masculine. And they say, well, this is a toxic trait, or, oh, you shouldn't, you guys should be more emotional. I'm not an emotional person. Most of my friends aren't emotional. That doesn't mean that we're disconnected from a sense of feeling. That just means, outwardly speaking, I don't want to be my wife. I'm not interested in that. And that doesn't mean that I'm somehow detached from making sure mentally I'm good, because me and the bros, we check, bro, are you good? Is everything all right? Okay, you got some issues on the job. Let's talk about it. Or you and the wife, or you and the girlfriend having issues, bro. Let's let the guys get together and let's talk about what's going on. We do support each other in that unique kind of way. But that's different from how you all, Sabby, as women may deal with some of your issues internally or amongst your core group of girls. And it should be that way because we are different. And I just feel Democrats don't appreciate that. They don't recognize that. And it's almost like everything that naturally comes to us as guys is just bad. Or I think I heard one Democratic academic a year or two ago say, well, men are unaware of how these traits are bad for them. Because we like to be a little more dangerous in the way we do. That's always been the case. Don't change that. We don't want to change that. And Sabby, I don't know a lot of women, and I remember I saw this study, speaking of Gen Zers, a lot of Gen Z women who said that they wanted strong men. That's how they described, that was a descriptive. And I thought that was so interesting how so many of the women said they just want strong men. Because women don't want men who are going to act or behave or display, I would argue, and Sabby, correct me if I'm wrong, qualities that are more akin to femininity than masculinity. And my wife oftentimes tells her girlfriends, she's like, my husband is a man's man. Like, my guy likes to go do guy shit. He likes to go hang out with this guy. And I want that. I want to know that my man is strong. He can protect me. He's going to provide for me. I don't want a man that's going to display traits that we display. There's nothing attractive about that, at least from my wife's perspective. And again, to go back to that poll that I read, a lot of Gen Z women were saying, like, look, we want guys that are guys. And so I saw that, Sabby, to say, not to go into a hole on this. I say that to say that I don't think Democrats get that. And I think that's why they're losing a lot of young men. I think it's why you're seeing a lot of these podcast bros on the right increase in followings, because they're talking to men the way men communicate on issues that men care about. And I think that's going to continue to happen because, in my perspective, even the men on the Democratic side, I look at some of them and I'm like, yeah, I'm not hanging out with you, bro. I'm not interested in what you have to say on anything because you don't speak to me. And I'm certain you don't speak to a lot of the other guys out there.
I think that this is something that the Democratic Party really needs to hear. Like, I really do. And I know some people will say, oh, well, Sabby, you must be secret right wing. Like, no. Like, people need to understand this was not an issue years ago.
It wasn't.
This was not controversial. I just finished watching this show called Adolescence. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you watch it.
Okay, make a note.
And it really touched me because I did not know that this was happening. Okay, so I'm a millennial, but I'm kind of a boomer when it comes to emojis on social media and all this kind of stuff. So I didn't know, like, there was this whole big, like, culture of people online where men are being attacked. Even some boys, adolescence is about a boy that was attacked online, being told that he would never have a girlfriend, never be with anyone. Apparently, this is like a whole big thing. And what it has caused is that some of those men have decided to go into what they call the incel culture. So you're familiar with that.
I am.
But the show really made me feel some type of way, and as if this is something I totally slept on, wasn't paying attention to, and I didn't even know that kids were doing these things, like that type of stuff, and it made me start to ask questions. Was Nina Turner right when she said that the Democratic Party emasculates Black men? Was she right about that? And what can be done to change that? And I'll go on record. My audience mainly knows this, but if it's someone new, I support rights for everybody. I support everybody having rights, etc. But I think what has become the issue now you're starting to see even a divide within the Democratic Party over LGBTQ, whereas people who are Democrat politicians are now moving in a different direction when it comes to that particular issue, primarily the trans issue. Yeah. And so there's a clash there. And I think what I'm hearing from people the most is that not so much that the Democratic Party supports these things, but more so that the Democratic Party, they take an issue and they kind of nail you over the head with it, and they go all the way to the extreme. And they said it gets to the point where it's like, even if you have a disagreement, you're smeared as right wing, or you're a bad person, or you need to get away from us, and that type of thing. And I think what the Democratic Party doesn't understand is that is not going to help you gain voters.
No.
A lot of the people, even right now, that are going to the AOC, like Bernie rallies that are happening across the country, are people who voted for Kamala Harris. A lot of those people are people who vote.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get the people who stayed home. And you need to ask yourself, why did those people stay? I know why they stayed home, because I had those conversations with them. But it's like, to me, it's like people want to be in an echo chamber. And I'm curious, if for you as a conservative, how do you feel about that? Like, as a Black conservative, because this is a question that comes up a lot whenever I brought Black conservatives on the show. How do you feel about when it comes to the social issues, in particular, maybe even some of the racial issues? And people ask, well, how can you be a conservative if you're Black? When you hear some of the rhetoric that comes from the Republican Party, not everybody, but some of the rhetoric that comes from the Republican Party.
Yeah, look, obviously, I mean, you got to acknowledge that you got to acknowledge what things are and call balls and strikes. And look, I'm Black. I can never change that. And certainly some of the rhetoric and language doesn't help. And I've certainly been one to call that stuff out and write about it. And it's interesting, Sabby, because I look at this in two different ways. You have one side that I would argue, being Democrats, with this idea of low expectations about Black people in general. Like, oh, we just got to be there to sort of coddle and help Black people because they just can't figure it out. Or they've been through so many systemic things. They did X, Y, and Z. I think that's very insulting. Then on the other hand, you have some on the right who will look at Black people and just say that perhaps we are more prone to violence, or we're more prone to being culturally disruptive. That is very abhorrent beliefs as well. And so I look at both of those two things and I say, okay, you got some problems over here. We got some problems over there. I'm trying to clean up my problems on the other side. And I think we have been slowly trying to move in a better direction as the Republican Party becomes more multiracial, which is the first time this has been the case, since the early 1900s, when the Republican Party was called the Negro Party because so many Black people voted Republican at the time. We haven't really had this sizable percent of people of color vote Republican. And so my hope is that this will sort of force a recognition for the party that, hey, people are interested in some Republican or conservative values and policies. We as a party need to push out extreme, hurtful rhetoric and embrace these new people who are going to bode well for the future electoral success of the party. And there are people who really are exploring that idea and trying to cement that. And I think that's a positive thing. On the other side, I haven't necessarily seen that, and good luck to them over there. But to the other points of your question about some of the cultural stuff, look, I'm a conservative. I'm not going to apologize for that. Yes, I recognize, society and culture has disparate people existing and coexisting together. I get it. I'm not opposed to it. I recognize it. I guess in some ways I have a libertarian view on this. You do you as long as you're not violating my personal rights. But I do believe that cultural norms and customs of behavior are important as someone who has a child. I'm not in fan of certain things with kids as it pertains to a lot of this gender stuff. I'm just going to be honest. And I know there are people who are going to disagree with me. And I do not say this, Sabby, in any disrespectful way to anybody who fundamentally believes that, hey, this is the way I feel that I was born. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to go there with my points. But I think children and being a child is complicated enough. And I think you got to let children be children and try to figure things out versus pushing certain things on them. The idea of trans girls who are biologically boys, I hope I'm getting the phrasing of this right, because sometimes I don't always get it right, wanting to play girls' sports. I have a daughter. I do not support that. I do not support that. I think if my daughter decides to play sports with other girls, the other girls should have the opportunity to compete with other biological girls. Because even if someone identifies as the opposite gender, if you will, because I know some people say gender is fluid. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it is what it is. You're biologically always going to have advantages that those biological girls will never have. How's that fair to my daughter? How's that fair to the other daughters playing sports? And so I just don't agree with that. I got to be honest. I really don't agree with that. And I don't know a lot of men, including men who are Democrats who didn't vote for Trump, who aren't Republicans, who look at that and say, I don't support that. I know a lot of Black people who are Democrats who say, we don't agree with this. We don't think that this is an acceptable cultural norm that we should be embracing. And so for me personally, that's just a bridge where I don't think I will ever be. And again, I'm not discriminating against people who are trans. I went to an all guys college. I have friends who have transitioned, who now identify as women. They're good human beings. I respect their right to be who they are, and I would defend their right to be who they are. But as it pertains to children, I just think it's very, very different, Sabby, because as an adult, I would hope you have the experience at some point, some modicum of wisdom and some level of intelligence to make whatever decision you want for yourself to maintain your autonomy as an adult. I mean, hell, there's psychology that showcases our brains just function differently when we reach a certain age versus when we're children. So if we accept that to be the case for a lot of other things, why wouldn't we treat that to be the case as it pertains to children? And again, going back to your question about the cultural stuff. So that to me, I just think Democrats are completely on the wrong footing, and they will lose a lot of people, including a lot of Black people who look at this and say, yeah, this is just frankly crazy to me. If an adult wants to do what an adult wants to do, go for it. But as it pertains to children, we got to have some different standards. And that's just what I personally believe.
The numbers show what you just said, actually, on both sides. For those who are not aware, you can look this up yourself. Democrats and Republicans largely favor what Shermichael was saying. Like the data shows that for both parties there. So I think that this is another thing where I feel like people get into their bubbles and they just don't want anything that is a different talking point or whatever. Let's just exclude that that's coming from the right, or let's exclude that that's coming from the left or whatever. But the data isn't lying. The data shows, and they showed this on CNN, that the majority of Democrat voters and Republican voters agree with what Shermichael was just saying. And I think that maybe that's something the Democratic Party needs to look into a little bit more. But I also feel like sometimes it seems like the cultural issues are a distraction from the economic issues, are a distraction from the fact that people are struggling, particularly in this country. The minimum wage hasn't been increased. There's the healthcare issue, and I'm curious about your opinion about this. This situation with Luigi Mangione. I'm not even sure. Like, I'll be honest, Shermichael, I've seen the pictures and then I saw Luigi. And the pictures, in my opinion, I don't even think I'm looking at the same person. And that's what I have questions about. It's just very weird to me. He could very well be guilty. He could also very well be innocent. But I think it says something that the healthcare system in this country, the predatory health insurance companies, the way that they treat the people, and that medical bankruptcy is extremely high in this country, in particular, medical debt. Why did it take someone killing a CEO of a healthcare company for this issue to be front and center once again? Because the last time I felt like it was front and center is when Bernie was running for president. Why did it take that?
I think sometimes complete disruption, unfortunately, has a unique way to bring attention to things that we probably dismiss. I don't condone violence to prove your point. You know, this guy had a wife and kids. I don't know every single decision that he made as a CEO in terms of being good or bad. I think there are better ways we have to address it, but healthcare is a problem. And I personally would love to see, if you want a private healthcare, I think you should allow for that. But no one can deny, and hell, even I can't deny this, it's expensive. A lot of people can't afford it. And I know a lot of conservatives, Sabby, I'm gonna be honest, I know a lot of conservatives, not about the Luigi Mangione thing, but I know a lot of conservatives in general that I've spoken to over years about healthcare, and people hate it. They have never had a good experience with insurers. Never. You can't deny that reality. And so the question is what should we be, now look, I don't know if universal health care is necessarily the answer. I got to be honest. I've done a lot of studies on that, and I have, I have my quarrels with it. But Sabby, I would be lying to your audience. I don't know if we're live right now somewhere. But I would be lying to your audience if I pretended that we have a system that's this great benevolent system where everybody has the greatest care in the world. That's not true. And with the technology that we have, I'm hopeful, Sabby, that these technological advancements will create a more affordable healthcare system. That's my hope. But we got to make changes, man. Like it doesn't make sense for the wealthiest country in the world, Sabby, for someone to be diagnosed with diabetes or a form of cancer or whatever other ailment, and they just can't afford it. Like that to me is just baffling. And I'm a guy who's all pro, make all the money in the world you can make. But I have a hard time reading case after case, regardless of what people's politics are, and realizing that people are going bankrupt, they're losing their houses, they're losing their jobs, it's destroying families, and say, well, you know what, that's a system that's working well. Seriously? No, the hell it's not. No, it's not. And we have to do something about that. And so one approach, Sabby, that I would like to potentially explore, Affordable Care Act, there was a lot of debates about that on my side, on the right. Obviously, people can still pay for their private care. But what if, Sabby, the federal government were to work with private insurers, and we would say, we are going to have some type of a subsidy-backed program. I guess kind of what Obamacare was attempting to do, but I don't think Obamacare did it effectively. So subsidy-backed, some type of tax incentives or credits, maybe some type of a pass-through through like a rebate or price caps to essentially say if someone's diagnosed with an expensive ailment, right, and you got to pay that $9,000 deductible, or whatever the hell the case may be. And there's an economic cutoff or financial cutoff in terms of what their yearly income is. And then the government says, look, insurer, if a person makes, I don't know, $150,000 a year, I'm just throwing out a random number here, Sabby, just rock with me for a minute here. And if a person makes $150K a year, they're diagnosed with cancer. Yeah, that may seem like it's a lot, but depending on where they are, cost of living, other debt, et cetera, that's really not a lot of money. They can't afford that. We as the federal government will say, if you meet 90% of that, we'll give you a tax incentive and a credit. So that will essentially be a write-off to your bottom line. Yeah, you will eat it in the immediate, but when you go to file the taxes for the corporation, we're going to allow you to write it off. Or we'll do a subsidy, almost like the subsidies that we passed on to people buying electric cars. But instead of the subsidy being on the individual, we allow the subsidy to be on the insurer. Or we look at rebates and we say, look, if you eat this cost, then we will allow there to be some type of a rebate or some type of a price cap that we will recognize when you do your tax reporting at the end of the year. There are ways that I would like to potentially explore where a company can say, oh, well, hell, if we're able to write this off, then, we got X number of cancer diagnoses a year. Let's say it costs the company $5 billion a year to eat that up. But we can write that $5 billion off as an essential loss in terms of our taxes. Hell yeah, we'll eat that cost up because it makes sense for the company's bottom line. Why not explore those types of creative tax possibilities or financial possibilities to alleviate the onus of debt onto the individual? Why not explore that, Sabby? And again, I don't know if that's the right way to do this. I'm just trying to throw out ideas that I know as someone who owns a business that I think could be creative from a business perspective, where a business would say, well, we would entertain that.
Because Big Pharma owns a lot of politicians.
Well, they do have a strong lobbying arm. You're not wrong about that. Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of it. And I know some people have concerns about universal health care. I would just, employ people to travel to some of the other countries that do have it. And then you can see, like, I spent part of my childhood in Germany. Mm-hmm. So to me, it just, I never understood why we don't have healthcare for everybody in this country, to me, it didn't make any sense. And then also you could look at something like what the military has, like my dad had TRICARE. So then all of us had TRICARE. Even TRICARE is better than what most people have right now in the United States. And you shouldn't have to be a part of the military industrial complex to receive that type of health care. You shouldn't have to be a politician in DC to receive, like, they have great health care, by the way.
Healthcare, yeah, they do. They really, really do. That
Yeah.
we pay for.
Exactly. But that's my case. And then one more thing I wanted to run by you as well. Second Amendment. This is another one where I think that you and I would agree, because some of my friends that are leftists, they are against guns, period. They say, just get rid of all the guns. I don't agree with that. I support the Second Amendment. And I think, especially if the police have guns, why can't the people have guns? Like, it's just really weird to me that people want this type of environment. Like, no, get rid of all the guns for the people, but the police and the military can still have guns. I don't think that's a good idea, but I do support the Second Amendment. I believe in the right for people to be able to protect themselves.
I don't disagree. And I think if you're a Black person, I mean, we have the best use case and the greatest experience of what happens when you can't arm yourself. And I know people say, oh, Shermichael, you're looking at the past. Well, you know, my grandparents are still alive and in the South. And I mean, I still remember stories, even when I talked to my granddad today, but he's in his late 70s, of how they used firearms just several decades ago, growing up in the Deep South, to stop the Klan from coming in their communities, wreaking havoc on innocent Black people. There are people who are still alive with these stories. So why in the world would you not want to have a mechanism to defend yourself? Now, if you trust, you know, your local municipality and you trust the federal government to keep you safe, which is a part of their job, then more power to you. But as a Black person, I'm skeptical. That's why I am very, very pro-gun. I will. That's one issue. You know, I'm open-minded on a lot of things, even if I don't agree. This is an issue that I am no compromise on. I don't have any room to give an inch on this, or hell, even a couple centimeters. I'm just not interested, because you need to have the ability to protect yourself. You need to, whether it's from government or whether it's from people who want to commit violence against you. And even for me as a guy, and you're seeing a lot of Black men get into guns, a lot of Black women. Actually, the fastest growing demographic still is Black women with firearms. People want to maintain the autonomy to protect themselves. Why would you want to diminish that? And why would you want to put that in the hands of somebody else? I'll just never understand that.
Very well said. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.